Welcome to the first session on Midrash Halakha as part of the Semicha program. Let us first define the term Midrash Halakha, because people sometimes confuse the term Midrash with Agada and Halakha. The term Midrash is derived from the Hebrew word darash, which means to seek or to look for, and originally was used only in the context of deriving halakha from the text of the Torah. So we seek the meaning of the text, try to understand what the pasuk is saying. So we are doresh, we are investigating and analyzing the pasuk in order to get to the meaning of the text. Now this is a process that we constantly apply when we use language. Even when we look at symbols, we always try to understand the meaning behind the text. This is one of the faculties that humans possess that enable them to analyze language and text. For example, when we see a sign at a door saying exit, right, we ask ourselves whether it's a noun or an imperative. Does it mean that this is a door through which one can exit, or is it a commandment, you have to exit through this door now? So we sift through those two options, and we choose the one that fits us most. In most cases, it is easy to do that. When we look at the legal text, like the text of the Torah, it is more complicated. So the term Midrash originally referred only to Midrash Halakha when we analyze the text of the Torah with the intention to arrive at a halachic conclusion, to understand what is the legal meaning of that text. Later on, the term was borrowed to commentary on any biblical text, so that was Midrash in general, or Midrash Agada. And later on, the other genres of Agada, such as stories or moral teachings, etc., were also included under the term Midrash. So, unfortunately, today we have this misnomer that when people use the word Midrash, the Midrash says, or according to the Midrash, they refer usually to the literature of Agada and not to Midrash Halakha. But we are going to focus on Midrash Halakha, and the one of the questions that we will have to deal with, maybe the main question, is whether the tools that the rabbis used in Midrash Halakha to derive the halakha, the law, from the texts, are they interpretive tools, or they are just tools that reveal the original meaning of the giver of the law? Meaning, is it interpretation or creation? Are the rabbis now explaining the text based on the oral tradition that they have received, or are they now creating new halachot, new laws, and they attach them to the biblical text? This is not to take away from the authority of the rabbis, but rather to ask whether a certain halakha derived from a certain pasuk, whether it has biblical or rabbinical authority. If we say that the tools are the midot of the Midrash Halakha, which we'll speak about soon, if we say that those analytical tools are just means to reveal the original meaning of the text, then the rabbis just expose for us the biblical law. But if we say that the rabbis are allowed to use those analytical tools to create new laws, then we have to be very careful in trying to discern what is a biblical law and what is a rabbinical law. Let us first look at the main authors and the main bodies of work that we have under the category Midrash Halakha. So the two most famous authors of Midrash Halakha are Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, and as we'll see later, they represent two different schools of thought. The books that are related to Midrash Halakha are Mechilta, Sifra, and Sifrei. Mechilta literally means tractate or masechet, and it is the commentary on Sefer Shemot. since Midrash Halakha only applies to the halachic parts of the Torah, the original Midrash Halakha started in chapter 12 of Shemot, which is a Chodesh Hazeh Rosh Chodashim, the first commandment. But later on, with the years, authors or publishers or copiers, it's not clear how it happened, but people felt that the book is incomplete if the first 12 chapters are left without commentary. So Tanaitic text was called either they took it from the Mishnah, the Tosefta, the Talmud, other parts, and edited it to the Mechilta to make it a full book. In recent generations, it was discovered that there are two Mechiltas. Actually, one comes from the school of Rabbi Ishmael, one comes from the school of Rabbi Akiva, and is actually attributed to his student Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So we have Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael and Mechilta de Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and sometimes there is a mix-up in terms of the texts which belong to each one of them, because the those who copied manuscripts sometimes combine two different versions. This is the Midrash Halakha on the book of Shemot. The Midrash Halakha on the book of Vayikra is called Sifra, which means the book, and that is because it was the most important and comprehensive book of halachot within the Midrash Halakha, and that is because Sifra Vayikra in itself contains many detailed halachot. Then lastly we have the book called Sifre, which means books, and that was the Midrash Halakha on the books of Bamidbar and Devarim. The probably most famous introduction to the concept of Midrash Halakha is a Baraita, where Baraita is an external Mishnah that was left out of the Mishnayot by Rabbi Ishmael, which is usually presented at the beginning of the Sifra or the Midrash Halakha on the book of Vayikra, but is also read in daily prayers according to some minhagim. And the Baraita says the following: Rabbi Ishmael Omer, ב-13 midot HaTorah nidreshet. Rabbi Ishmael says that the Torah can be interpreted or can be nidrash in 13 ways. מקל וחומר, מגזרה שווה, מבניין אב וכתוב אחד, מבניין האב ושני כתובים, מכלל ופרט, מפרט וכלל, etc. So, I'm not going to go now into each and every one of these midot, of these tools. We'll deal with them as we get to each one of them. Kal v'homer, I'll give one example. Kal v'homer is an important tool, but it's an analytical tool that not necessarily has to be part of the Jewish tradition. It already appears in the Tanakh in several places. The idea of Kal v'homer is a fortiori, meaning if a certain law applies to a certain case, then it would definitely apply to a case which is of a higher level of importance. For example, when Yosef accuses his brothers of stealing the goblet from him, they say, "Hen kesef asher nimtza befi amtechotenu hashivonu elecha mitzrayma ve'ech nikach mibet adoni kesef o zahav." In other words, what they say, how can you accuse us of stealing when even the money that we found, which was legally yours, we gave back to you? This is in chapter 44 of Bereshit, verse 8. They say, if we even return to you money that was legally ours, it is obvious that we would not steal something that belongs to you. That's a logical process called Kal v'homer. It also appears in the legal context of trying to decide whether someone is guilty or not, and deciding whether to apply a punishment to that person or not. We find it in the book of Bamidbar, of Numbers, and that is when Miriam and Aharon speak of Moshe. So we find in chapter 12 verse 14, after Miriam was punished with leprosy, Moshe cries out to God asking for her healing, and God says, "Ve'avi hayarok ya'ag befanea halot tikalem shiv'at yamim tisager shiv'at yamim yichutz lamachane ve'har ta'asef." God says, if her father would have insulted her publicly, she would stay home for 7 days. Now that I, God, insulted her or shamed her, she should be embarrassed even more. So let her stay 7 days outside the camp, and then she could join the camp. The rabbis learn from here also another rule, which is Dayol lev min adin liot kenidon, that with that comparison, even though the situation is more severe, meaning to be shamed by God is worse than being shamed by your own father, the punishment, however, is the same: 7 days of being quarantined. So this is the general idea of Kal Vachomer. If a certain law, a certain outcome applies in a certain case, it will apply even more to a case which is greater in scale or quality than the original one. And then Rabbi Shmuel goes on to list 13 different tools. There is a baraita attributed to Rabbi Yosef Galili, who was who lived later, and he counts 32 midot. But traditionally, we follow that concept of 13 different interpretive tools that are called Midrash Halakha. The interesting thing is, and then we'll see when we talk about the schools of thought of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, that there are two such sets of tools. One presented by Rabbi Akiva, one presented by Rabbi Shmuel. The tools that we always mentioned are those of Rabbi Shmuel, but the method and the outcome applied in the Talmud is that of Rabbi Akiva, and that is something that one must pay attention to when studying Gemara and Midrash Halakha. So when we look at the 13 midot, as I mentioned, of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva both lived in the 2nd century, but the first appearance of the midot is at the time of Hillel HaZaken, which is still in the before the destruction of the temple, about 40 or 60 years before the destruction. And this text appears in the Tosefta, the external Mishnah, on Masechet Sanhedrin, in chapter 7, Halakha Yud Aleph. But what we find there in the name of Hillel is not, we don't find 13 midot, but rather 7. And this is what we read: Shiv'a devarim darash Hillel HaZaken lifnei ziknei petera. Hillel HaZaken used 7 interpretive tools in learning halakha from the text, and he presented them to the elders of the house of Betera or Petera. What are those tools? Kal Vachomer, the one that I just mentioned, Gezerah Shava, Binyan Av, Vekatuv Echad, Ushne Ketuvim, Uklal, Uprat, Uchlal, וכיוצא בו במקום אחר, ודבר הלמד מעניינו. אלו 7 מידות, דרש הלל הזקן לפני בני פטרה. So, if we look here at those 7 things that Hillel teaches or presents to Bnei Betera, one of them is the Kal Vachomer that we mentioned. Gezerah Shava is a logical analogy of applying what is written in one place to what is written in another place, as long as there is a common word or theme that connects them, and that is something that we'll have to study more in depth, because there are several rules that govern the usage of that very rule of Gezerah Shava. Binyan Av v'katuv echad u'shnei ketuvim. There's a Binyan Av, meaning a main category under which we file certain laws, and then when we find a law that has some of the elements of the other things that are filed under the Binyan Av, then we assume that it has all the qualities of those laws. Klal uprat, uprat uchlal, those are things that are elaborated more on by Rabbi Ishmael, but basically they analyze verses where the Torah first describes a general rule and then goes on to present the details of that rule. So then the question is, what do we follow? Do we follow the general rule, or only those things that are detailed within the rule? For example, when the Torah speaks of a lost object, of a neighbor or a friend, it says, "V'chen ta'aseh l'shoro, v'chen ta'aseh l'hamoro, v'chen ta'aseh l'chol avedat achicha asher tovad imenu mtzata." This is what you have to do with his ox, with his donkey, with his garments, with anything that he loses and you find. So the question is, do all the things, all the objects in the general rule, kol avedat achicha, have to have the same quality traits as the ones that were singled out? Why were they singled out, etc.? That is, that one part of the text teaches or elaborates on another part of the text that is hidden. So those are the 7 midot that Hillel presented to Bnei Betera. So already here we see that there is a certain development from the number 7 that Hillel presents to the 13 that Rabbi Ishmael presents, and later on to the 32 that are delivered in the name of Rabbi Yosef Aglili. So we have to understand what is the historical background of the evolution of Midrash Halakha, because there is an evolution, there is a development. Even when we understand that there is a core of those teachings that comes as oral tradition all the way from the tradition from Sinai, it's not all of the Midrash Halakha that came in that manner. And there are numerous examples for that. Even the fact that we have mahaloket, that there are debates, what is the exact meaning of the text, and we have sometimes 2 or 3 opinions. That in itself shows us that not everything is Torah Moshe Sinai. Otherwise, they would have known the right tradition. One of those 3 opinions, or 2 of them, cannot be correct. So, not necessarily everything is Torah Moshe Sinai. What was the background of the development of this type of study? Most probably, that was the method of learning from the very early days of learning Torah in general, because the Midrash Halakha is a system which is attached to the biblical text. So, for example, if I take the verse Basukot Teshevu Shiv'at Yamim Kol Ha'ezrach B'Yisrael Yeshevu Basukot, you have to dwell in the Sukkot for 7 days. All citizens in Israel will dwell in a sukkah. So, when this pasuk is studied and taught with Midrash Halakha, the master will teach the student Basukot in the Sukkot or the tabernacles. What is a sukkah? Sukkah is a structure that has 3 walls, that has sechach, etc., etc. Then he goes on to the next word, teshevu. You have to dwell. That means you have to sit or eat or sleep in the sukkah, to each his own interpretation. Shiv'at yamim. Then here there will be an explanation. Do you have to be in the sukkah for 7 days, or it means that if you need to eat, then you have to eat in the sukkah all 7 days? Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael. Now the Midrash Halakha will focus on the word kol. Why do I have to say kol? All the citizens of Israel. Why isn't it enough to say the citizens of Israel? So usually the Midrash will look at such a word and say that it came to include other people that otherwise we would have not included under that rubric. That's called lerabot. Ha'ezrach b'Yisrael. So we will have to ask the question: what is the definition of ezrach? Citizen doesn't mean someone who only pays taxes. Doesn't mean someone who converted to Judaism fully, etc. Yeshevu basukot. You have to dwell in the sukkah. And again, here the commentators will have to understand or explain what is the meaning of the word lashevet. Does it mean to sit, sleep, eat, etc.? Now, one of the important questions when we look at the Midrash Halakha as it evolved in that manner is, what came first? Did the Halakha come first, or the Midrash come first? Meaning, do we start from the biblical text, analyze it logically, and then arrive at a conclusion, or did we already have an oral tradition and now we're using the tools of Midrash Halakha to sustain and support our old tradition. The last of these two options is called asmachta, a support, and this is probably the more common example of Midrash Halakha. Meaning, there were the minority of the rabbinical text was one that was handed word by word from Mount Sinai by Moshe to the elders and then on to the next generations, and the majority was one that the rabbis, through their analytical analysis, were able to provide. And I give you one example, and explain also why was it necessary. The rabbis, the judges, knew they had the tradition, the oral tradition. They knew what the halakha says, and people usually relied on them. But at a certain point, and especially after the Greek invasion to Israel, people were exposed to different cultures, and they wanted to know better. They wanted to know why they're doing what they're doing, and they turn to the rabbis and they say, "We want to see a proof that what we're doing is the right thing." So in some cases, the proof was in the text. In other cases, the rabbis had to twist the text in order to provide the proof to people to convince them. So let us look at an example where the rabbis definitely needed to support an oral tradition with the text, and that is the commandment to use 4 species on Sukkot. The Torah says in Leviticus 23:40, Vayikra Kav Gimel Mem, ולקחתם לכם ביום הראשון פרי עץ הדר, כפות תמרים וענף עץ עבוד וערבי נחל, ושמחתם לפני אדוני אלוהיכם 7 ימים. You should take on the first day a fruit of a glorious tree, branches of palm trees or date palms, a branch from a thick tree, and the willows of the river, v'arvei nahar, and you rejoice in front of Hashem. So the branch of a thick of a tree with thick foliage and the fruit of a glorious tree are not specified in the text. We all know that's an etrog. The Mishnah speaks of etrog. The whole Masechet Sukkah speaks of etrog as a matter of fact, without trying to explain why is it that we use an etrog. It seems like at a certain point, the people demanded to know from the rabbis, how do we know it's an etrog? So we have a baraita, which is an extra Mishnah, mentioned in the Gemara, in Masechet Sukkah, Daf Lamed He Amud Aleph, 35:1 in Tractate Sukkah, and read the following: Peri Eitz Hadar, Eitz Sheta'am Eitzo Ufiryo Shaveh. The Torah says that we need to take the fruit of a glorious tree, and the way the words are written in Hebrew, the construct Peri Eitz Hadar suggests that the taste of the tree and the taste of the fruit are the same. So we already see the problem of that statement, because that means that if I keep looking for a tree that of which the food and the bark or the trunk taste the same, then I could use it as Peri Eitz Hadar. So the Gemara says ve'ema pilpelin, maybe it's hot peppers. Kedetanya, and they bring a proof to show that it could be a pepper. So the Gemara answers, Hatam mishum de la efshar, heichena avid, ninkot hada la minkat lekihata, ninkot treot lata, pri ahad amar ahmana velo shnayim o shlosha perot. The Gemara answers that it would have been possible The problem is that you cannot hold the pepper. We're talking about the hot peppers, not the big bell peppers that we're familiar with today, but the small hot peppers that grow in Israel. They're always mentioned as something very precious, very important, and an import of Israel to other nations. And the Gemara says this is such a small fruit that if you hold it in your hand, it would not be seen. So you'll have to take 2 or 3, but the Torah says clearly peri, which is singular, so you have to take the etrog. So according to that suggestion in the Talmud, there are 2 options for determining what is the fruit that we need to take on Sukkot. It could be either the etrog or the peppers, and only because the peppers are not practical, we take the etrog. Meaning we rule out the possibility that it's peppers. Then there's another opinion of the Gemara. Rabbi Omer, al tikre hadar ela hadir. Madir ze yesh bo gedolim uktanim, timim u'ba'alei mumim hachenami. Rabbi says the word hadar, which we read as glory, should be read as hadir, meaning the pan where we keep the sheep. And just as in the pan you find sheep of all ages and wholesome and ones with blemishes, so also the etrog. The Gemara asks the question that other trees also have bear fruits that are not all the same size, and the Gemara answers, the exceptional thing about the etrog is that it could stay in the tree for a long time. Therefore, when the new small fruit appears, the old bigger fruit is still there, and with that it's like the sheep in the pen. And obviously this is a stretch of the imagination. Why would I think that this is the only fruit that one is allowed to take on Sukkot, just because it has this the Torah insinuates such a remote way, telling us take a fruit that grows on a tree like sheep in the pen. How would I make this mental leap and get to an etrog? But that's not all. There's another opinion in the Gemara. Rabbi Avu Amar, al tikre hadar ela hadar, davar shedar binano mishna leshana. You don't read the word hadar with hataf patah under the hay and patah under the dalet, but rather with 2 kamatzim, and it means davar shedar binano mishana leshana. The hay is what we call hay yedi'ah, and the word dar is from the word living or dwelling. So hadar, that which is dwelling, it's a fruit that could dwell in the tree from 1 year to another year, and this is known that really etrogim could keep on growing on the tree. Finally, Ben Azai Omer, al tikre hadar ela hidur, שכן בלשון יווני קוראים למים הידור, וזוהי שגדל על כל מים, הווה אומר זה אתרוג. Ben Azai says that the reason why we take an etrog, even though the Torah never uses the word etrog, how do we know that the species that we're supposed to hold on Sukkot is an etrog? Ben Azai says, בלשון יווני קוראים למים הידור. You know that the Greek word for water is hydro, or hydro. So it has the 3 letters, the 3 consonants, H, D, and R, which are parallel to the word hadar. So, and since the etrog is a tree that consumes a lot of water, gadel al kol mayim, or, according to one interpretation, it could survive either on irrigation or in rainwater. So, etrog is related to water, and therefore the word hadar tells us that the fruit that we need to take for Sukkot is an etrog. Now, the problem with that interpretation is obvious. Ben Azai lives in the 1st or 2nd century of the Common Era. The Greek language was not familiar in the region until the invasion of Alexander the Great in 323 before the Common Era, and Jews already returned from Bavel to Israel before that, about 160 years earlier to that. Not only that, throughout the whole period that they lived in Israel, as before the exile, they did not know the Greek language. So how can the Torah give us a clue in the Greek language in order to tell us which fruit to take? Wouldn't it be easier for the Torah to write just the name of that fruit? So obviously, what we see here is an asmachta. The rabbi is trying to support a popular custom in which they know. We assume that they know that according to the oral law, Torah Moshe Sinai, they were told this is the fruit. This is the fruit that you have to take. But this is not enough for the people. The people want to know exactly where is it written. So this is an example of Midrash Halakha being stretched to the limit. But obviously, there are many cases where the Midrash Halakha is used in order to reveal the original meaning of the text as was given to Moshe on Har Sinai, and that will be the next paragraph that we're going to discuss. So the example of the etrog shows us a case where it was clear to the rabbis that this is the meaning of the text. Etrog, they had an oral tradition, but they had to present it to the people. And of course, there are many other pesukim where the rabbis derive the meaning of the text by using the tools, meaning the halakha was maybe unknown before they used the interpretive tools, and then they were able to reveal it. Unknown either because of lack of tradition or because the case which required the answer did not arise before that. Or as Maimonides says, that some halachot were forgotten. In any case, the debate that raged on even at the time of the rabbis, as we'll see, was how far can you stretch the power of those interpretive tools, and what is a part of tradition in it? Meaning, are you allowed to introduce a new interpretation of the text, or it has to conform with the oral tradition that we have regarding the halakha? And in case we don't have a tradition, do we decide to be cautious? And as we say, misafek, we're not going to take a certain action, or could we rely on this halakha? But we'll get there when we analyze the story of Hillel and his confrontation with Bnei Betera, the one which is alluded to in the Tosefta and is a general more abstract form, Elu midot darash Rabbi Hillel Zaken Bnei Betera, but it actually is based on a story that appears in the Talmud Yerushalmi and the Tosefta, and tells of Hillel's rise to glory based on a halakha that he revealed to Bnei Betera that they were not aware of, and that is whether Korban Pesach could be sacrificed on Shabbat or not. But before we get there, I want to go back for a second to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael. It's important to understand the difference in between them, because when we talk today, with anyone who studies in yeshiva or studies Gemara, etc., the statement that is very common is, we all know that there's not one letter that is superfluous in the Torah. Every letter is there for a reason. And people use this statement very broadly. They apply it to the halachic part of the Torah, to the non-halachic part, meaning to the narrative part of the Torah. And it's important to make a distinction. Originally, this statement, or this idea that every word in the Torah is measured and counted and is there for a reason, and there's something that I could learn from it, was only used or professed by one school of thought, that is the school of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Ishmael disagreed with that. And even Rabbi Akiva, who believed that you could learn something from every word of the Torah and is there for a meaning, only said this rule regarding the legal part of the Torah and not to the narrative. So, but this is something that we have to deal with later in terms of the Midrash Haggadah and Midrash Halakha when we get there. But let us look for a second at these two schools of thought, Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva, and see how they differ on this major issue, major concept of the necessity to learn something from every word in the Torah. So let us start with one example that appears in Masechet Kiddushin, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Bet 17:2, and that is a baraita, an extra mishnah on the pasuk Ha'anek ta'anik lo mitzonecha megonecha meikvecha asher berachecha Adonai Elohecha titen lo. This is a pasuk in Deuteronomy 15:14. It speaks about the slave which is now being freed, and the Torah says you must give him a grant, a bonus, when he goes free. Ha'anek ta'anik lo mitzonecha megonecha meikvecha, from your sheep, from your grains, and from your wine. Asher berachecha Adonai Elohecha, that those things which God blessed you with abundance, and those things. So the Baraita raises the following question: Asher berachecha Hashem Elohecha, God has blessed you and gave you abundance. Yachol nidbarech bayit bigalo ma'anikim lo, lo nidbarech bayit bigalo en ma'anikim lo. The verse seems to suggest that you have to give a bonus to the slave because your house was blessed because of him. So, or because your house was blessed with abundance. So, does it mean that if one's business or field was not successful or was not extremely prosperous during the time of the service of this slave, he does not have to give him a bonus? Talmud Lomar, the Baraita answers its own question. Ha'anek ta'anik mikol makom. Since the word is doubled, ha'anek ta'anik, grant, you shall grant. Mikol makom, you always have to give, whether you were blessed with abundance or not. So then, why did the Torah say Asher berachecha, God blessed you, to say that you have to give him proportionally according to the blessing, but you always have to give him? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer dvarim kichtavan. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah disagrees, and he says we have to follow the second part of the pasuk and the literal meaning of it, which is, if the house was blessed because of the servant, then you give him a bonus, and if not, you don't give him a bonus, which is very logical, and the thing that a process that is applied with many employees in the contract. The bonus is a bonus of performance. There's no logic in giving a bonus to someone who does not perform, because then he does not have an incentive to perform better, and he knows that he's going to get the bonus no matter what. The question raised towards Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is, what are you going to do with the doubling of the verb ha'anek ta'anik lo? His answer, or the Talmud's answer, could be the answer of the editors of the Talmud, doesn't matter, is Dibra Torah Kilshon Bnei Adam. The Torah uses the vernacular, the Torah uses the form of speech which humans use. And that's an extremely important rule, because when as we look at the Torah and we look at Midrash Halakha, if one would really meticulously would go through the Torah and clean it of all the superfluous things that the Midrash Halakha claims are necessary to learn halachot from, we will remain with an unreadable text. And this is not my claim, it's a claim of Rabbi Shmuel and of his disciples. He said, Dibra Torah Kishon Bnei Adam. The Torah uses the language that people use. And the doubling of the verb is a common thing in the Hebrew language. So when the Torah says, Ha'anek ta'anik, grant you shall grant, or Azov ta'azov imo, help you shall help your friend whose animal crouches under its burden, or it says Hashev tashiv, you have to return the lost object, and repeats the word return, or V'ayayim shamot tishmeu, if you listen, you shall listen. In all these cases, which by the way the translators of the Torah to different languages struggled with with the question of how to translate exactly those words. I think that the JPS usually translated give you shall give, or grant you shall grant, or help you shall help, etc. But one school of thought believed that it's there in order for us to learn something from it, and another school of thought says Dibra Torah Kishon Bnei Adam. This is the way people speak. So here, give an example in the narrative part of the Torah, where there's no halakha to be learned from. when Yosef was in the prison, in the royal prison in Egypt, and he encounters the two servants, the two ministers, the cupbearer and the royal baker, and he interprets the dream of the cupbearer, and he realizes that this man will soon be able to see Pharaoh. He says, "Please remember me and mention my name to Pharaoh, so he'll release me from prison." Why? He says, "Ki gunavti me'eretz ha'ivrim, v'gam po lo asiti me'uma, ki samu oti babor." He says, I was stolen, or I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and I have done nothing here, and I was put in the pit. When Yosef says, I was stolen, or I was kidnapped, he doubles the verb. He says, Ki gunavti. So this is a classic example that shows that this indeed was the way people spoke. They would double the verb. Another example we find in the dialogue between Lavan and Jacob and Yaakov in Genesis chapter 31, verse 30. Lavan tells Yaakov, "Ve'ata haloch halachta ki nichsafta levet avicha, lama ganavta et Elohai." He says, now you have walked away, or you have left me, because you were longing to your father's to go back to your father's house. Why did you steal my idols? But the way Lavan says it is the doubling of the verb. Ve'ata haloch halachta. Walked, you have walked. Nichsov nichsavta. Longed, you have longed. So those examples and others, many others in Tanakh, show us that this is the way people spoke. And what Rabbi Yishmael and his school, what they believe in is that the Torah wants to deliver a text which is readable and enjoyable. And for that purpose, the Torah would use the same language that people use, and we cannot derive halakha, we cannot be what is called medakdek, to be meticulous and analyze every letter and every word in a legal way to derive halakha from. And that is a very important rule, because it already shows us that Midrash Halakha has a limited scope, cannot interpret and expand on every pasuk. There are two more elements that we're going to discuss in the next session, and they are kol parasha שנאמרה ונשנתה לא נשנתה אלא בשביל דבר שנתחדש בה, which I explain briefly here. It means that the Torah, according to Rabbi Yishmael, the Torah would sometimes repeat a whole paragraph just to teach one new concept. So that is an important, and again, something which is a more important statement, and something that many people who study Torah and Talmud on a regular basis are not aware of. And then there's a smaller category of cases where Rabbi Shmuel says that a certain commandment of what looks like a commandment of Torah is optional and not mandatory, and Rabbi Akiva says it's mandatory. So again, it's a question of how to interpret the language of the Torah. We will discuss it next time, as well as the encounter of Hillel Zaken with Bnei Betera. If you are listening to that and you have time until I post the next class, try to look at this story of Hillel and the Passover in Tosefta of Pesachim, chapter 4, and in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Pesachim, page 66, 1. It also appears in Yerushalmi, Pesachim, chapter 6, Halakha Aleph, but even if you just look up the Tosefta, again, Tosefta Daled Yud Gimel, chapter 4 of the Tosefta, and page 66 of the Talmud Bavli Masechet Pesachim, that will be illuminating. Try to look at the story and compare and contrast what happens between Hillel and Bnei Betera in the Talmudic story and the one that appears in the Tosefta. Until next time, goodbye.